What's up, guys? Welcome back to the shop. In today's video we're going to be making our first mosaic, or first real mosaic. And here we got 15 and 20 and 1084, and I will be stacking them in an alternating pattern with a little bit of 1084 at the end, and hopefully the pattern comes out nicely. And I'm not really sure if I'm gonna end up with what I want. Not really sure if I know what I want, but we are gonna make a mosaic by the end of this video, and it's gonna be cool. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna weld up my billet. As you can see, I have them marked out, which are 15 and 20 and which are 1084, and it's a pretty big boy stack. Alright guys, so I want to talk to you about something right now that I still have the majority of eyes on the video. If you don't know, Hurricane Helene has affected a lot of people the last week and a half since it hit. It's caused a lot of devastating mudslides, and all that rainfall has affected very many families and people. And one of those people affected was a friend of the show, John Norwood, also the owner of the YouTube channel Old Hickory Forge. I don't know him personally as well as I would like to know him, but I know he's going through a tough time right now. I've been watching him for well before I became an actual YouTuber and started, making my own builds, got into knife making, or, started recording videos and stuff. So I am a viewer of his channel from a long time before, and unfortunately he was hit pretty badly with the storm, and due to a mudslide where he lives, he lost his shop, which is the source of his income, and full-time knife maker, that's where he makes his money. He lost his home, unfortunately, and the worst of all, he lost his fiance due to the mudslide. As far as I know right now, he's currently in the hospital, but he'll pull through. But unfortunately, no amount of anything can fix the fact that he lost his fiance and his home and his shop. So I'd like to ask you guys if you have any disposable income or anything like that. If you'd like to, in the description down below, I have his GoFundMe that was set up by his uncle, and you can donate there if you have the spare income. Whatever you can donate helps to try, to get him back on his feet, to cover the funeral expenses, to cover hospital bills, to cover medical bills, to cover, getting him back up on his feet, and helping him get his shop back and get his house back, and all that stuff. It's rough to see, and it's sad to see, but I hope we can come together as a community and donate to his GoFundMe and help him out. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for donating, and let's get back to the video. Alright guys, before I do anything, I'm going to flux the billet, make sure I can keep any oxygen off to help ensure a nice solid forge weld, and I'm going to start working it down. Now, as you can see, my press is in its outdated version because I started this build very many months ago, and I've been doing it in spare times that I have in between builds. And this billet is actually part of the billet from my Viking challenge that I did back in April, and I had way more material than I needed, which I knew going into the build, but I decided to forge it anyways. That way I could save the extra for another project I had in mind, which is this project. So as you can see, we're forging it down, and the more we forge it down, the longer and heavier the billet gets. Well, not heavier because it's actually losing mass as we're forging it, but it does get longer and harder to wield. So here I'm starting to make my C pattern. I'm hitting the billet on the diagonal and forging it back into a square. That's gonna help me get a C-type shape at the very end of the billet once I cut it out. Unfortunately, since this is my old setup, it does not press very straight, so I do have a lot of difficulties trying to get this as nice and clean as I would like. but I do manage to get the initial part done for the Viking challenge. And since I have all this extra, I'm just gonna cut it off on the bandsaw and save it for this build. So now we skip forward in time, and this is the piece that I cut off, and those are the very sloppy half C's I was making. So I'm gonna clean up the very tip of the billet and we're gonna get to work on it. First things first, we're gonna weld a holding stick on there, that way we can have better control over it once we get into actually forging it. So now, as you can see, it is my updated press, the way you guys know it as it is right now. And we're gonna start forging in that C shape that we didn't finish forging in the original billet. And as you can see from the way the press is working it very easily, the press did get a lot stronger with the initial upgrades that I did to it, as well as it presses a lot straighter. So here I'm taking my angle dies and I'm trying to get a consistent even square throughout the billet. That way I can move forward and square it off. Here I'm just going to use my long dies, that way I can make sure that my billet is nice and straight. If you don't have any of these straightening dies like the ones I have here, I definitely recommend making some. They are definitely a lifesaver and something that I wish I had when I started knife making a few years back.
Alright guys, so I've gone on ahead and already prepped these pieces and I've surface ground the sides are gonna be forge welded together, and I left it overnight in vinegar because of this pitting. I didn't want to grind too much into it. See, there's a lot of pitting and stuff, so I ended up leaving it in vinegar and then just hitting it on the wire wheel to clean it up and get all the scale out. So it's clean steel, but because you can't really tell here, since I left it in vinegar all night, it cleaned up all the edges, but it doesn't really show you what part is the 15 and 20, what part's the 1084. But pretty much these last 4 layers here are the 1084, right where my thumb is at. And since that's not enough 1084, I tried to etch these ones to show you guys, but didn't do a very good job. I don't know why. Probably because of the vinegar etch. Whatever, but you know, this little corner right here, that's the 1084. So I want that dark, that thicker bold part to be bolder in my final pattern. So what I did was I prepped up this piece of 1084 that I'm going to be putting here in the center. If I can get it in, that's going to go like that. And then I have these guys right here that are gonna go in here. So pretty much this right here is what I'm going for. It's gonna have like a black cross in the center, and it should forge weld into those corners, and it should look kind of like natural. That's what I'm going for. Hopefully it works out. If it doesn't, oh well. This is the first time I do any kind of mosaic, and I know my C's weren't that good, so since I started originally with the press before it broke, the C's weren't all that good, and I tried to fix it, but I couldn't. So this is going to be a trial run. If it comes out good, nice, and if it doesn't, well, at least I get a rough idea of what I need to do. Alright, so let's weld up our billet.
And here I'm gonna dip the billet into some kerosene. This helps the forge weld, helps keep oxygen off the inside of the billet. And sometimes I use WD-40, but in this case I use kerosene. And I'm just going to use my squaring dies to start working the billet in all directions, making sure I get a nice solid weld on the inside. And then I'm just going to draw it out with my drawing dies. If I say that this whole process was nerve-wracking, it really was. I put a lot of time into this build, and with such complicated welds, it's very easy to mess up. And throughout the whole process, I definitely had a bunch of cracks that ended up welding back together, but it was nerve-wracking most of the time. But it would be a lie to say I did not learn a lot, and now I'm a lot more comfortable and hopefully moving on to more complicated projects down the line, especially with the upgrade in tooling that I did earlier this year.
Alright guys, so I have my 4 for my new stack prepped. I went on ahead and did it off camera because it's just going to be repetitive, and I'm probably going to do it again because it's going to be repetitive again, but pretty much this is what I got. I have cracks on one side of the billet throughout. This one also has it somewhere, and because of that crack, I'm gonna put them on the outside, and hopefully they forge weld a little bit better. I don't want to put them on the inside and risk having a crack on the inside, so I'm gonna go on ahead and re-square it, weld it back together, and give it another forge session. So far it's looking pretty cool.
And on to forge weld number 3. When making mosaics, there's a lot of repetitive cut and stack, and that's pretty much what happens a lot in this video. I'm gonna continue forge welding pieces in quarters and hitting it with both my squaring dies and my longer dies to make sure I have a nice solid billet. And then I'll be re-forging it down into a square, usually a 1" by 1" square, thanks to the help of these 1" kiss blocks that I am using. But since it incorporates a lot of forge welds and a lot of cleanup time and all that good stuff that has to be done for a proper forge weld, that's why mosaic billets and mosaic knives are so expensive. It's not really the material, even though it is a decent amount of material, but it is a lot of time, a lot of propane, and a lot of cleaning involved in getting the final look of the knife to where it is ready for tiling. And then tiling is a whole another beast in and of itself, but the end result is totally worth it. There's always so many crazy patterns different people make, and I want to learn how to make those patterns myself.
Alright guys, so this is the end piece. I went on ahead and etched it, and it looks pretty cool. It's a little bit towards the side, but that's okay. It's an end piece. It's always going to be slightly distorted compared to the center, but I'm liking the way it's looking. And so I have my pieces here. They're a little uneven on the top, but that's no big deal. And I'm gonna go on ahead and weld them together and get the billet started for our next forging session. So now it's gonna be this guy stacked. So I should have about a lot of these guys in the center. I don't know the number exactly, but yeah, it's gonna look pretty cool.
And now we go on to forge weld number 4. This forge weld will be slightly different from the other forge welds, as I'm no longer going to go to a 1" square, but I'm going to be going into a 1" rectangle of sorts. The reason why I'm going to go into a rectangle versus a square is because I need the billet to be rectangular shaped. That way I can cut it and tile it properly. If it is a square, there's no real way to tile it.
So curiosity got the best of me, so I was doing my prep to mark out my tiles and cut them. I cut off the end to look at what the pattern looks like, and you can get a good look at what it looks like right there before I tile it. It's not exactly what I was going for, but then again, I wasn't really sure what I was going for. I'm really just trying to figure out this whole tiling process and get all the steps down before I do something like super high end. But overall, it's very interesting looking pattern. I'm learning a lot as I go, so that's gonna be pretty cool. So next up, I'm gonna mark them. I'm gonna set up my bandsaw to 35 degrees, and I'm gonna cut out tiles probably an inch thick, and then I'm gonna set them up and get the billet ready, and I'll take you guys along that process. Alright guys, so I have all my pieces here. They're marked, can't really tell, but I got them marked on which side they are cut from. And pretty much what I'm gonna have to do is flip them over so that this side right here is exposed, and this is where our pattern is. So now this is gonna become the outside of the billet. But I get pretty confused on this part, so I gotta make sure I do it right and I don't mess it up. But pretty much like so. And we're gonna run the whole billet that way. Setting up the tiles properly is crucial, and it's gonna affect the end pattern overall, so it's definitely very nerve-wracking to get it down right and to make sure I don't put number 3 in the place of number 5 or something like that. Overall, it's very scary. And that's basically how it's gonna sit, but because my cuts are pretty uneven, I'm gonna have to weld them to a sacrificial piece on the bottom, put them on the surface grinder and even it out, and then put another sacrificial piece on top. That way they can all weld together properly. By the way, all these surfaces that are gonna mate, they're cut at a 35-degree angle, and they're already ground to 120, so they're already prepped for the forge weld. And whenever we press down here, the pressure is going to be from top to bottom, and it's going to cause these two lines to forge weld together, and that's what's going to hold everything together. So hopefully this thing comes out right the way I want it to, and I don't ruin all this work, because I've been working on this for way too long in little bits and pieces as I can whenever I get a chance to. And now it's time for our final forge weld, and I'm just going to be hitting from top to bottom, trying to make sure all those angles forge weld as best as I can. I was actually running low on propane at this moment, so I was definitely sweating. I was afraid of not welding everything properly. And one thing that I disliked about the process, but it's crucial, I have to put sacrificial pieces on top and on bottom to make sure I have a zero oxygen weld, zero atmosphere weld. And to do that, I have to then grind it off, unlike whenever I do canister where I can just pop it off. Here I have to grind off the excess steel, and I have to be constantly dipping it in acid and making sure that all that mild steel is off. Alright guys, so here is the piece. I've already ground it to 220, made sure all the steel was off on the edges as well. If I do have any tiny little spots that I don't see, they're gonna fall off with forge scale anyways. But overall, it's looking pretty promising. The pattern in there is looking pretty good. I'm not the biggest fan of the unions, but hey, for my very first Mosaic Damascus, I can't complain. And hopefully first of very many, because this has been a lot of fun. It's during whatever little extra time I have between projects. But overall, it's been a blast. And next thing we're going to do is forge out a chef's knife out of this guy. And hopefully it looks even cooler once it's in, knife form. So remember when I said that the last process was the most nerve-wracking? Well, now that I have a fully
forge welded billet, now comes a very nerve-wracking part, and that is shaping this billet the least aggressive way possible. As I was forging it, I would have cold shuts appear from welds that we're wanting to open back up, and yeah, I had to be constantly hitting it with some flux and re-welding those pieces either by hammer or under the press. But eventually I did get through it, and I managed to forge in my tip, and from there it was fairly smooth sailing. Here's something fun that I've been doing lately, and I'm cutting in my tangs and then forging them down with the press, and that seems to be working pretty well. So that cut tool has come in handy, and it gives me a nice clean transition without, you know, pulling too much of that steel down from the heel. And even with all that help, I wish I had a power hammer, because all this hand forging definitely gets my arm tired, and it gets tired because I'm not used to hand forging, which probably means I should hand forge more. But I do have a hydraulic press, and I do love to use it. So here I'm just working down the heel, trying to get about 2 inches or 1 3/4 inches. That way I have a nice tall heel, and I'm shooting for as big of a knife as I can, but in all honesty, I did cut myself a little short on material. I should have given myself at least an extra inch. But I am a big believer in you live and you learn, so hopefully I learned, because I haven't learned this whole time, and I've been undercutting myself a lot lately. But I work it down with the press as much as I can to try to get as much length as I can. I originally wanted an 8-inch chef's knife, but I ended up with a little bit under 7 inches. But I personally like a smaller chef's knife, because a 6-inch knife is very, very manageable and very, very, very controllable. But some people like 8-inch knives, some people like 10-inch knives, and this one ended up being on the shorter side, but overall still a very, very nice knife. And if you want to pick up this knife, it will be available on my website when the video goes out, so first come, first serve. And I hope it goes to a good home soon. So as I was forging it, some pieces did try to split open, and most predominantly it happened on the very end of the tang area, so I ended up just hitting it with some MIG weld and closing it back up. It was very, very minimal, but because my tang wasn't quite as long as I originally wanted to have it, I ended up just welding it, and that helped pretty well. It was probably 1/4 inch, but it's better to have a longer tang than a shorter tang, if I do say so myself. And here I'm just profiling the knife. I gave it a very, very simple shape. I didn't want to distort it too much or cut off too much. That way I had a nice bold pattern, and it came out pretty nice, if I say so myself. Which of course I'm going to say it came out nice since I made it. So here I'm going to hit it with the surface grinder and get a nice even knife. Originally I had planned to forge it a little bit more to shape, but it ended up being a bit thicker than I had originally anticipated, so I ended up basically grinding it flat. And here's something really cool. As I was normalizing the knife, I decided to turn off the light and show you guys the cool little incandescent light that comes off the knife and how it bounces around. It has a certain name to that phenomenon, and I do not know what that name is, so you should Google it. But from there we go on to our quench and our heat treat, and we have a very, very successful heat treat and a nice hard knife.
Alright guys, so we are out of the temper, and this guy's looking very nice. You can see that pattern popping out through the tempering process, well, the heat treating process. It's looking very, very promising. A little marks right there when I scratched it with my file to make sure it was nice and hard. Don't tend to record that, but yep, it was definitely nice and hard. And Next up, we're gonna make our little step down and start our finish grind. But before we do that, I'm gonna put it back on the surface grinder first and clean it up with some 220 grit, and then we'll move on to doing our bevels.
Once I get the shoulders pretty close to where I want them, I like to hit them with a file just to get them a nice and crisp. The knife is a harder knife, but a file is definitely just slightly harder. It does not take off material as fast as I would like, but I definitely like to do that afterwards. That way I don't run the risk of having a sharp corner whenever I heat treat, and running the risk of it becoming a hairline fracture because of the stress. So here I'm just initiating my bevels, trying to get it nice and centered so that I can then go in and grind the knife all the way back to the spine. This knife ended up being very, very light. I have not weighed it, but it's pretty light. Now, I am no chef, but I'm pretty sure the lighter the chef's knife, the better, especially for slicing like meats and stuff like that. I don't know about vegetables, maybe you want a heavier knife for certain things, but for an overall chef's knife, I like to make them as light as I can get them and as thin as I can get them. But of course, on the edge, the spine, I like to leave a little bit under an eighth. That way it still has a very nice robust spine. So here I'm getting the whole knife to a 220 grit, and I'm rounding over the spine and all the sharp corners, getting them off before I get ready for my hand sand. And something cool that I have now in my shop is a laser, which actually I have 3 lasers. I have another 2 that I will be reviewing soon, so if you want to check those out, I definitely recommend it.
So here's my handle material. I've already marked it out and laid out where I'm going to be making my notches. And this is a piece of ebony that's going to be on the front part. And this is a piece of maple burl. Looks pretty cool.
So funny thing, my tang is a little bit under, no, it's about an eighth thick, and I'm using an 8-inch drill bit here, but the chuck on my drill press can't hold an 1/8-inch drill bit, so I have to do it here with my hand drill, and to be very, very careful not to overdo it, which is a lot harder than it looks. I really wish I had like a milling machine in the shop, but even if I did have one, I don't know where I would put it, but I definitely wish I had one. That way I could get these down a lot better and a lot easier. I still don't really have it down exactly as I want it, but that's the thing, we're always getting better and we're always trying to get better. So overall, yeah, I wish I had a milling machine. And I've noticed I sometimes get on tangents whenever I'm doing these voiceovers. But back to the build, here I'm drilling in my holes for the rest of the block. And those I can oversize them a little bit, since those will be hidden inside. The most important part is the top part. And that's why I tend to do them in ebony, because that is a nice dark black color and I can hide my imperfections. Maybe someday I'll upgrade from ebony, but today is not that day. And here I super glued the 2 pieces together, and I scribe on my center lines. That way I can use them as reference to mark out the center of my knife. It ended up being a little bit skewed to one side. I think that happened whenever I was putting in the knife, since super glue dries pretty quick. It ended up being just slightly a few degrees off to one side, but the grinder fixes that up very quickly. And here you can see my lines, and you can see that big old mess up I had, but the grinder makes quick work of it. And I ended up with a slightly thinner handle than I normally do, but it was still relatively comfortable. Actually, it was still very comfortable. I might be making thinner handles down the road, because I see a lot of knife makers do make some quite thin handles that I don't really understand. But this handle came out a little bit thinner than what I'm used to, and it was pretty comfortable. Maybe because the knife was so small and light, but overall it came out quite nice. And here I'm using the bandsaw to get the rough shape of my handle. That way I can go to the 2x72 and do quick work of it. It's important to get rid of these small pieces with the bandsaw, that way I don't wear out my belts too fast. Also, surprisingly, as of late, I don't get very many comments complaining about my voiceovers, so that's pretty cool. That means we're reaching the correct audience, though I do miss the little boogers, and they should definitely come back from time to time to complain. That way I can get some giggles off. But other than that, I'm breaking in my corners with my belt sander, and I'm smoothing it out, checking it periodically to make sure that the handle is comfortable in the hand. And just for an FYI, at the time of the recording of this video, I have a hurricane coming in this direction pretty soon, sometime mid next week. So if there's no video next week, blame the hurricane. That just means I probably don't have power and I didn't get a chance to upload it. And it's definitely not because I am behind on my apocalypse build and I am concentrating 100% on that. But take a look at that cool, beautiful pattern. And we're on to our glue up now that the handle is ready and the knife is ready. And I'm going to take this moment to thank you guys for watching. I really couldn't do this or afford materials or, most of anything without you guys helping support the video by watching and commenting and liking and subscribing. So if you haven't done any of that, you should definitely do it. And if you want to help me in a more monetary fashion, but you can't afford a knife, you can definitely check out my Patreon. And on Patreon, I will be offering knives first before I make them open to the public, as well as you will get access to a community Discord where you will be able to chat with me and other makers and, get help on projects and stuff like that, as well as I will be doing periodic giveaways. I have a whole bunch of old knives that I never sold from back in the day, as well as some of the newer ones that just didn't make the cut for me to sell, but I will definitely be giving them away on Patreon periodically, so you definitely check that out. You will get an entry with every tier that you subscribe to, and I would really appreciate if you guys went and checked that out. There's a list of all the benefits. I will be making sure that I provide more value than the $5 that you are paying, and definitely I would appreciate that, as that would help me level up my shop and get more materials and all that good stuff. Overall, it was a fun build. The knife came out great, and it will be first sell on my website. Definitely check it out. As always, I appreciate you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.